There's a moment, and if you've ever been in a room where the air changes before anything else does, you know exactly what I mean. There's a moment right before everything goes wrong where the world gets very, very quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The other kind. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone. I've thought about that day on Verath Station more times than I can count. Not because it was the most dangerous thing I ever witnessed. Not because anyone died. But because of what it meant, what it said about us, and about them, and about the gap between those two things that everyone on every side of the galactic compact kept pretending didn't exist. It started with laughter, and it ended with silence. And everything in between, that's what I want to tell you about. The setup. Verath Station is not a beautiful place. I want to be honest about that right away, because whenever someone tells a story that takes place somewhere unfamiliar, there's always this temptation to make the setting romantic, to make it grand, to paint it like something out of a dream. Verath isn't that. It's a deep space transit hub, one of 9 compact designated neutral exchange points that stretch across what the cartographers call the Middle Corridor, which is basically just the bureaucratic way of saying the part of space nobody really wanted until everyone suddenly needed it. The station is shaped like a flattened disk, roughly 4 kilometers in diameter, rotating slowly to generate a consistent gravity of about 0.78 standard. Which sounds fine until you realize that standard is calibrated to Velori body mass, not human, and so every human on that station walks around feeling just slightly off, like you're perpetually recovering from a long flight, like your body keeps forgetting how heavy your own feet are. The corridors are wide. They had to be. The station was designed with a dozen different species in mind, and some of those species are not small. The Keth alone, the insectid trading collective from the outer ring systems, are typically around 2.4 meters tall and nearly as wide through the thorax, and they move in clusters, their chitinous bodies clicking against the floor panels as they pass. You learn to stand to the side when you hear the clicking. Everyone does. The light inside the station is a compromise. A committee of biologists from 6 different species apparently argued for 3 years about what spectrum to use for the main corridor lighting, and the result is something that satisfies no one perfectly. A sort of amber-tinged white that feels almost right to human eyes, but carries a faint ultraviolet bleed that you can't quite see but can definitely feel over a long shift. Humans who work extended postings at Verath tend to get mild headaches around day 4. By day 14, you stop noticing. I'd been on station for 11 days when it happened. I was there as a junior logistics coordinator civilian contractor, attached loosely to the Compact's Trade Facilitation Division, which is a polite way of saying I spent most of my time reconciling cargo manifests and trying to figure out why someone had shipped 40 crates of refrigerated biological samples to the wrong platform again. Not glamorous work. But it paid, and more importantly, it put me close to the thing I actually wanted to be close to, the intersection of species. The raw, messy, fascinating reality of different kinds of minds trying to figure out how to coexist. I'd grown up reading about the first contact. We all had. My generation, the ones born 5 or 6 years after the Velori ships first appeared in Earth orbit, we were raised on a combination of awe and anxiety that I don't think any generation before us had ever had to carry. The world changed before we were old enough to understand what the world had been. And then we spent our whole childhoods trying to figure out where we fit in a universe that had apparently been very crowded for a very long time without us. Verath Station was, in many ways, the answer to that question made physical. Here is where everyone fits, the station seemed to say. Here is the level playing field. Here is the place where a Keth broker and a human logistics coordinator and a Velori diplomat and a Dravani ship captain all eat lunch within 30 meters of each other, and somehow the entire thing doesn't collapse. Mostly. The platform, the particular corridor where everything happened was called Platform 7, Concourse C, though nobody called it that. The people who worked the station just called it the Long Walk, because it was exactly that. A straight, unbroken passage almost 600 meters in length that connected the civilian transit hub to the military and diplomatic docking arms. 6 lanes wide. High ceilings, nearly 8 meters, hung with light strips and environmental monitors, and those peculiar hanging fixtures the Velori preferred that looked something like wind chimes made of blue glass. Along the Long Walk, there were observation benches, wide, curved things made of a material that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite stone, set against the walls at regular intervals. Species with different preferred resting postures had their own sections, marked by small color-coded strips embedded in the floor. It had taken me 3 days to figure out the color coding. On day 4, I'd sat in the wrong spot and had to relocate quickly when a cluster of Dravani, barrel-chested, four-armed with faces like compressed geography, gave me a look that communicated, across the species barrier with total clarity, that I had made an error. The Dravani are not a patient people. But that's beside the point. The point is the long walk, and what happened there at approximately the 14th hour of the station's day cycle, a time the logistics team informally called the afternoon rush, though it bore no resemblance to any afternoon I'd ever experienced on Earth. I was sitting on one of the human-designated benches, eating a portion of reconstituted grain product that the station cafeteria called oatmeal, with the confidence of people who had clearly never actually eaten oatmeal. I had a tablet propped on my knee showing 3 cargo manifests I needed to cross-reference. I was not paying attention to the long walk. And then the Galactic Guard detachment came through. The Galactic Guard. Let me explain the Guard, because if you haven't spent time in compact space, you might not understand exactly what they are and why they make everyone sit up straighter when they pass. The Galactic Guard is not, technically speaking, a military force. That's the official position, and the Compact's diplomats will say it with perfectly straight faces. What the Guard actually is, in practical terms, is an interspecies peacekeeping and ceremonial force that operates at all Compact installations. The armed component of the organization that everyone agreed was necessary, but no one wanted to call an army. They wear a uniform. It's distinctive deep blue-black with silver rank insignia, fitted to whatever body shape the individual soldier happens to have, with a helmet design that varies by species but always incorporates the same broad silver stripe across the top. The uniform is designed to communicate authority. It does this very effectively. Even to species who have no prior cultural association with that color or that silhouette, the Galactic Guard uniform produces a recognizable response. This entity has power. Give them space. The particular detachment that came through the long walk that afternoon consisted of 11 soldiers. 10 of them were Velori, the dominant species in the Compact, the ones who had made first contact with the most species, who held the most seats on the Council, who had been in space for approximately 1,400 years longer than humans and were not shy about that fact. Velori are tall, most of them clear 2.1 meters, with narrow frames, wide-spaced eyes that can shift color with their emotional state, and a grace of movement that I'd always found slightly unnerving, like watching something that had decided to be humanoid as a courtesy. The 11th soldier was human. His name, I would find out later, was Sergeant First Class Dario Velacruz. He was from a place called Sonora in Mexico on Earth, though he'd left Earth at 19 and had been in space so long that he spoke about the planet with the specific fondness you reserve for somewhere you loved, but know you can't go back to. He was 34 years old. He had been in the Galactic Guard for 9 years. He had served on 4 different stations and 2 long-range patrol vessels. He was, by any measure, an experienced soldier. He didn't look like much. And that was the whole problem. What they saw. Velacruz was shorter than the Velori soldiers he walked among. He was shorter by a significant margin. The top of his head reached roughly to the shoulder of the nearest Velori, a soldier named, well, I never learned her name, but I'll call her the tall one because she stood out even among the Velori for her height. He was also proportionally different in the way that humans always look different next to Velori. More compact, broader through the chest and shoulders relative to height, with a kind of solid density that Velori frames simply don't have. He walked in the second position of the formation, just behind and to the left of the formation's leader, a Velori sergeant major named Orathvel, whose silver insignia indicated 22 years of service and whose bearing indicated that he was aware of this fact at all times. The formation moved at the standard guard pace, deliberate, measured with that particular quality of controlled movement that only comes from people who have practiced it until it stops feeling like practice. Velacruz moved with them, exactly with them. His arms swung at exactly the regulation angle. His eyes tracked forward at exactly the correct point in the middle distance. His footfalls were as quiet as anyone else's in the formation. He was, in other words, indistinguishable from his peers in everything except appearance. And that was the problem. Because a group of Dravani traders had set up at one of the wide commercial alcoves off the Long Walk, a sort of informal gathering that happened sometimes in the afternoons, where merchants and traders would spread samples of their goods across the ledges and benches and try to catch the attention of passing transit passengers. It wasn't officially sanctioned, but the station administration had learned that trying to stop it created more trouble than tolerating it, so they looked the other way. There were maybe 12 Dravani in the group. Some were sitting on their folded lower limbs in the Dravani resting posture. Some were standing. They were talking among themselves in that particular Dravani way, overlapping conversation, multiple threads simultaneously, a sound like machinery operating just below the threshold where it becomes concerning. They were watching the Long Walk the way merchants always watch a busy corridor, assessing, categorizing, deciding. And when the guard detachment passed, they noticed Velocruz. The laughter. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I've thought about it a lot and I want to be accurate. The Dravani didn't start laughing immediately. There was a moment, maybe 2 seconds, where they simply watched the formation pass. And then one of them, a heavy-set individual with 3 rings of blue pigmentation around his upper pair of arms, a Dravani status marking, I knew by then, said something to the others. I don't speak Dravani. Hardly anyone outside the species does. It's a language that requires vocal anatomy humans don't have and Velori don't have and basically nobody else has, which means that most Dravani who operate in compact space use translator devices and everyone else just gets the machine output. I had a translator on my tablet, and it was running passively, so I got a partial rendering of what was said. The translation came out as, "They sent a child-sized creature to walk with soldiers. Does it know what it is doing there? Perhaps it is lost." And then they laughed. It was a Dravani laugh, which is not like a human laugh. It's a sound that comes from deeper in the chest, a kind of percussive rumble that in the right context could almost be mistaken for a machinery fault. But there's a quality to it, a rhythm that once you've heard it you recognize, and the translator supplemented it with the notation, amusement, derisive register. Derisive. They weren't laughing with him. They weren't even laughing at a situation. They were laughing at him, at the human soldier walking in his formation, doing his job, unaware that 12 Dravani traders had just decided he was the funniest thing they'd seen that shift. I remember setting my tablet down. I remember thinking, he's going to hear that. Because the Dravani weren't being quiet about it. The laughter spread through the group, some of them pointing, or making that particular Dravani gesture I'd learned by then meant, look at this, can you believe this thing? And the sound was substantial. The Long Walk carries sound well. 600 meters of hard surfaces and high ceilings and very little to absorb anything. He heard it, he had to have heard it. I watched him. He didn't break stride. He didn't turn his head. His eyes stayed exactly where they had been, that point in the middle distance, approximately 15 meters ahead, that guard-trained focus that I would later be told is called the lane by soldiers who'd been through the Compact Guard's training program. He stayed in his lane, literally and otherwise. The formation continued down the Long Walk. The Dravani laughter followed it for a few seconds and then faded back into their multi-layered conversation. A few other passers-by, a pair of Velori civilians, a Keth broker carrying an enormous sample case, 2 human techs from the station's maintenance division had paused or glanced over at the sound. The human techs exchanged a look. One of them shook her head slightly. The other looked at the retreating formation with an expression I recognized. Embarrassed for him, for all of us maybe. And I thought, that's it. That's the whole incident. A group of alien traders laughed at a human soldier, and the human soldier kept walking, and everyone moved on, and the day continued, and that was that. I picked my tablet back up. I was wrong. 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, the formation came back. This is the thing I hadn't anticipated, and the thing that changed everything. The Long Walk is not a one-way passage. The guard detachment had gone through toward the diplomatic docking arm, presumably for a routine check or an escort protocol. Those things happen dozens of times a day on a station this size, and now they were coming back. Same direction, same formation, same measured pace. Same 11 soldiers. Same human in the second position. The Dravani traders were still there. Of course they were. They were traders. They had goods to show and time to spend, and there was no particular reason to be anywhere else. I saw the formation enter the far end of the long walk, maybe 200 meters away, and I thought, oh. And then I thought, this is going to happen again. What I didn't expect, what none of us expected, I think, the few of us watching from the benches and alcoves along the long walk, was what again was going to look like. The Dravani saw the formation coming. I could tell by the way the energy in their group shifted, the way one of them said something to the others, and several of them turned to look. The same one with the blue arm rings, their informal spokesperson, I decided, said something that made the others respond with anticipatory sounds that my translator rendered helpfully as amusement, anticipated. They were gearing up for round 2. I put my tablet away completely. What changed? The formation was approximately 50 meters from the Dravani alcove when I realized something was different. I couldn't name it at first. I just felt it. That same sensation I mentioned at the beginning, that thing where the air changes before anything else does. Some quality of the approaching group that my eyes hadn't consciously registered yet, but that my body was already responding to. And then I saw it. Velacruz had moved. Not out of formation. He was still in his position, second left flank, exactly where he should be. He was still moving at the same pace, the same regulation stride. His hands were still in the correct position. But something in the geometry of him had changed. The best way I can describe it is this. Before he had been a person moving through space. Now he was a structure occupying it. The difference is subtle, and I'm not sure I'm describing it correctly, but it was absolutely visible, something in the alignment of his spine, the set of his shoulders, the angle of his chin. Not higher, not aggressive, not performing anything. Just settled, like something that had been slightly out of true had found its level. He was looking at a point approximately 15 meters ahead of him. And that point happened to be exactly where the Dravani group was standing. The moment the formation reached the alcove, the Dravani made their sound, that percussive, derisive laughter. Same as before, same translator notation, same pointing gesture from the blue arm rings one. A couple of them had leaned into the corridor now, making it marginally narrower, the way people do when they want to be seen doing something without technically obstructing anything. The formation walked past them. Velacruz's eyes moved. That's the whole physical description of what happened, and I know it sounds like nothing. A man's eyes moved. But I'm telling you, sitting 20 meters away on a bench with a forgotten tablet in my bag, watching this unfold, those eyes moving was the most significant thing I'd seen in 11 days on that station. He didn't turn his head. His eyes moved in their sockets, a precise, controlled movement that tracked from the 15 meters ahead point to the Dravani group and then back. A fraction of a second, maybe less. It wasn't a glare. It wasn't a confrontational look. It wasn't anger or warning or challenge. It was just attention. Pure, specific, deliberate attention. And the Dravani speaker, the one with the blue arm rings, felt it. I watched him feel it, watched the laughter stutter in his chest, watched his upper arms, all 4 of them, shift in that microsecond way that Dravani bodies shift when their nervous system processes something unexpected, like a system running a rapid recalibration. The laughter didn't stop immediately, but it changed. The others picked up on it, the way people in groups always pick up on when the initiator's energy shifts. One by one, the sound faltered. The formation kept moving. Velacruz's eyes returned to the lane. The Dravani were still watching. And then the formation's leader, Orath Vel, the Velori Sergeant Major, 22 years of service and all the bearing that implies, did something that I had never seen a Velori Guard officer do in 11 days of watching them move through this station. He turned his head, not toward the Dravani, toward Velacruz, just for a moment, a fraction of a second, and his eyes, wide-set, currently a flat amber that Velori display when their emotional processing is active but contained. His eyes were focused on the human soldier to his right rear. And then he turned back, and kept walking. And the thing about that look, the thing that I've spent a lot of time trying to understand, is that it wasn't a reprimand. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't what do you think you're doing. It was something else. The bench. I couldn't let it go. That's the honest truth. I sat on that bench after the formation had continued down the long walk and around the far bend, and I tried to go back to my cargo manifests, and I just couldn't do it. The image of Orathvel's eyes kept returning to me. That look. The look that wasn't what I expected. The Dravani group had dispersed by then, not all of them, but the Blue Arm Rings one was gone, and the energy of the remaining traders was different. Quieter. They were doing commerce again, showing samples, talking to a Keth broker who'd stopped to examine something. The incident from their side seemed to be over. But I kept sitting there, and I kept thinking about what I'd seen. I'd been in compact space for 7 months by that point, long enough to understand that the Velori relationship to humans is complicated in ways that no one briefing you back on Earth ever quite prepares you for. The official position, the compact's position, the position you get from any diplomatic document or interspecies relations module, is that humans are full member species, equal in status to the founding members of the compact, welcome and represented and valued. The unofficial reality, the one you learn from the way conversations sometimes stop when you walk into a room, from the way certain Velori will address your superior instead of you even when you're the one they're actually supposed to be talking to, from 1,000 small signals that are individually ignorable but collectively impossible to miss. The unofficial reality is something more like tolerated probationary members, status pending further review. We were new, we were short-lived by Velori standards. They can live 300 years and we average 8 decades on a good day. We'd been in space for a blink. We were, in many sectors of compact society, considered something between charming and irrelevant, like the enthusiastic new employee who shows up with a lot of energy and not a lot of context. The Dravani weren't part of the compact in the same way. They were affiliated traders, semi-independent, the kind of relationship the compact maintained with dozens of species who were useful but not governed. And they had their own views about hierarchy and status, which were, broadly speaking, based on physical presence and economic power, neither of which humans typically embodied to impressive effect. So when I thought about what had happened on the long walk, I thought about all of that. And I thought about how Velikraz had moved. Not what he'd said, not what he'd done, but how he'd moved. Finding HIM. I found him 3 hours later. Not looking for trouble, I want to say that. I was on my way from the logistics hub to the station cafeteria, taking the longer route past the guard administration office because I'd started doing that as a habit. Something to look at besides cargo containers and manifest errors. The guard administrative area was technically staff only, but the corridor leading to it was public, and there was a sort of informal break area at the junction. A few tables, a dispensing unit, a window that looked out at the docking arm superstructure. He was sitting alone at one of the tables. Out of uniform, not entirely, but the outer layer of the duty jacket was off, folded on the table beside him, and his rank insignia were covered by the softer underlayer. He had a cup of something in front of him. He was reading something on a small, personal device. He looked like a man enjoying 40 minutes of silence after a long day. I almost didn't stop. I'm not a forward person by nature. I'm the type who rehearses conversations in my head for days before having them. But something, the cargo manifest still waiting, the way the afternoon had lodged itself under my skin, something made me stop at the table adjacent to his and sit down. He looked up. He had a face that didn't immediately communicate much, not unfriendly, not welcoming, just present. Brown eyes, a bit of sun damage around the temples that no amount of time in space seemed to have resolved, and a stillness about him that I associated now with what I'd seen on the long walk. "You were on the long walk this afternoon," I said, brilliant opening. He looked at me for a moment. "So were a lot of people." "Platform 7, Concourse Sea Guard Detachment. You came through twice." A pause, "Yeah." "I was sitting on the bench," I said. "I saw what happened." He picked up his cup, took a drink, set it down with the careful deliberateness of someone deciding how to respond. "Dravani guys thought it was funny. It happens." "Not what I meant," I said. "I meant the second time." Another pause, longer. "What did you see?" he said, and his voice was genuinely curious. Not defensive, not wary, just curious in the way of someone who finds out they've been watched and wants to know what was visible. I told him. I described what I'd seen, the change in his posture, the way his eyes had moved, the way the Dravani speaker had felt it, the way Orathvel had looked at him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, he looked at me. Just for a second, I said, but yeah. He looked down at his cup, a small movement of his jaw, not quite a smile, not quite not. Huh, he said. What he told me. I don't know why he talked to me. He didn't have to. I was a civilian contractor, nobody important, sitting at the next table being presumptuous. But he did, and I've always been grateful for that. He talked for about 40 minutes. Not all about the incident. It started there, and then wandered the way conversations do when the person you're talking to is thoughtful and has had a long day and isn't in the mood to perform normalcy. He'd been in the Guard for 9 years, he said. He'd been the only human on his unit twice before. He'd been one of 3 humans in a unit of 42 once, which he said was its own kind of strange. Not as lonely as being the only one, but a different kind of conspicuousness. People watch you, he said. Especially when you're new somewhere, especially if you're human, because we're new everywhere in a way. You kind of have to figure out early on what you're going to do about it. What are the options? I asked. He thought about it. Option 1 is you try to disappear. You make yourself smaller, quieter, less visible. You do your job and don't call attention to yourself and hope eventually people just see the uniform and not the person inside it. He paused. That doesn't really work, because the uniform fits us differently and we move differently, and whatever you do, if someone wants to see that you're human, they're going to see it. What's option 2? Option 2 is you push back. Every time someone says something or does something, you respond, make clear you won't tolerate it. Another pause. That doesn't work either, mostly. You spend all your energy responding to other people's behavior instead of doing your actual job. And some of the things you'd have to respond to are so small, a look, a sound, the way someone moves when you walk past, that you can't respond without looking like you're the problem. What's option 3? He looked at me then. You just keep being what you are, he said. Exactly what you are, nothing more, nothing less. You don't shrink and you don't perform. You do your job the way your job should be done. And you trust that eventually, not always, not immediately, but eventually, the work speaks. I thought about that. Is that what happened today? I asked. I don't know what happened today, he said honestly. I felt them laughing the first time. And the second time I don't know. I wasn't going to let them see me looking at the ground. And I wasn't going to make a scene, so I just did my job. Exactly my job, exactly the way I know how to do it. And Orathvel looked at you, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Orathvel has been in the Guard for 22 years, he said finally. He served on the Compact Council's direct escort detail. He's been in 3 live incident responses. He is, he paused, choosing his words, not a person who gives his attention to things he doesn't think deserve it. So what does it mean that he looked at you? Velocruz picked up his cup again, didn't drink from it, just held it. I don't know, he said. But I've been thinking about it for 3 hours. The next morning. I was back on the long walk the next morning. I know how that sounds, like I was hoping for something, like I was following a story. I wasn't. Or I was, but it wasn't calculated. It was more that the long walk had become the most interesting place on the station to me, and I found reasons to route my morning through it. Nothing happened on the long walk that morning. What happened was in the cafeteria, during the first meal cycle. I was eating actual oatmeal this time, which I had successfully explained to the cafeteria staff after a lengthy negotiation involving a lot of pointing at the ingredient dispensers, when I saw Velocruz come in with 2 of the Velori soldiers from the detachment. Not Orathvel. 2 of the others, younger, with fewer service markings, the ones who typically moved as a pair within the formation. The 3 of them went through the food dispensers together, and I watched the 2 Velori interact with Velocruz the way you learn to read people when you spend a lot of time in spaces where you don't speak the language. Through body angle, through the direction of attention, through all the physical vocabulary that precedes words. The pair treated him the way soldiers treat a colleague. Not a subordinate, not a curiosity, a colleague. There was a kind of unspoken negotiation at the table about where to sit that resolved with all 3 of them choosing a corner spot that worked for everyone's preference. And then there was eating, and there was apparently some kind of conversation about the day's duty schedule, because at one point, Velocruz held up his personal device to show them something, and they leaned in to look. Ordinary, completely ordinary. And yet, Orathvel came in 20 minutes later. He went through his own food dispensing routine. Velori food requirements are different from human, so the dispensers are separate. And then he came into the main seating area, and he made a choice. He sat with them, not at the next table, not at an adjacent space. He pulled out the seat directly across from Velocruz and sat, and there was no hesitation in the movement, and Velocruz looked up, and they exchanged what appeared to be a completely normal acknowledgement between two people who worked together. I ate my oatmeal. I thought something shifted. What I learned later. I'm going to tell you some things I didn't know until later. I didn't know them the day of the incident or the day after. I learned them over the following 3 weeks, during which I extended my station contract by 30 days for reasons that had nothing to do with cargo manifests. I learned them in conversations with Velocruz, who turned out to be someone who talks when he trusts you and says almost nothing when he doesn't, and who apparently decided at some point in that first cafeteria break area conversation that I was okay. I also learned some of them from a station administrator named Yeva Sorokina, who had been at Verath for 3 years, and knew the social ecosystem of the place the way you only know something you've watched from a fixed point for a long time. Here's what I didn't know. The Dravani group, the traders on the long walk, had been there for 6 days before the incident. They were part of a larger Dravani commercial delegation that had arrived ahead of a significant trade negotiation between the Dravani Independent Collective and 2 compact member species over mineral extraction rights in the Outer Rim. The delegation was substantial, 40-plus traders and their support staff, plus a smaller diplomatic contingent. They had significant leverage in the negotiation, and they knew it. The Dravani, Yeva told me over station-brewed coffee in her office on my 2nd week, are not a species that has been uniformly welcoming to the human addition to compact membership. The reasons are partially economic. Human trade relationships have disrupted some traditional Dravani markets, and partially something less definable, what Yeva called the old contempt, which is the attitude that species who have been in space for centuries sometimes develop toward species who have just arrived. A kind of reflexive ranking. We were here first. We know how this works. You are still learning. The laughter on the long walk was not, in other words, incidental. It was that contempt finding an easy target. And here's what else I didn't know. Orathvel had filed a formal interaction report that evening. This is standard guard procedure when any incident occurs that could have escalated and didn't. The report described the incident on the long walk and Velocruz's conduct. I never saw the report. That's not the kind of document a civilian contractor gets access to. But Yeva had seen a reference to it in the Daily Security Digest, and she told me what the summary classification was. The summary classification was Professional Conduct Exemplary. That's the highest category. What the commander said. The commander didn't say anything. I want to be accurate about this because the word snap to attention in a title implies something dramatic, a moment of visible public acknowledgement. And there was a moment. There was, but it wasn't what you might imagine. It happened on day 17. The Dravani diplomatic delegation, not the traders, the actual negotiators, had a formal arrival ceremony at the main diplomatic reception hall. Platform 1. Deck A. This is standard for significant delegations. The station puts on a small show of institutional dignity, which means a guard honor guard in full dress configuration, a compact representative in ceremonial attire, and a brief formal exchange that means nothing in particular but signals that everyone is taking the occasion seriously. The guard honor guard was, naturally, drawn from the on-station detachment. 12 soldiers, and among them, assigned by the rotation schedule as far as I could tell, just the normal duty roster, was Velocruz. The guard assembled outside the reception hall before the ceremony. I was there because Yeva had got me a peripheral pass. Officially, I was there to coordinate a cargo release that was timed to the delegation's arrival, which required a logistics rep to sign off at a specific moment. Unofficially, Yeva knew I'd become interested in what was happening, and she had a logistician's appreciation for not wasting good observation. The Dravani delegation came through Platform 1's main access corridor at the appointed time. And leading the delegation, flanked by two of the trade negotiators, was the speaker with the blue arm rings. He had been laughing at the guard detachment on the long walk. Now he was walking into a formal reception, and the guard was standing at attention outside the hall's entrance, and he had to walk past them. I watched him see Velacruz. It was a specific moment of recognition. I saw it move through his body, that Dravani nervous system recalibration, the shift of all four arms, the pause in his gait that was almost but not quite imperceptible. He had expected, I think, to walk past the guard and not think about it. And then he saw the human soldier standing in the line, perfectly still in full dress uniform, eyes forward. And he slowed fractionally. I watched it. Velacruz did not move. And then the Dravani speaker walked past, and the delegation filed into the reception hall, and the guard maintained their position, and nothing happened. Except, the station's guard commander came through a side entrance about 2 minutes later. Her name was Commander Sailveth, and she had 31 years of service and a reputation, according to Yeva, for being the least sentimental person on the station, while somehow also being the most precise. She had arrived to fulfill her own ceremonial role in the reception. And as she passed the honor guard line, she did what commanders do. She walked the line. A brief inspection, eyes moving over each soldier, taking in the details, the uniform condition, the bearing, the stillness. When she reached Velacruz, she stopped. Not for long, 3 seconds, maybe 4, and then she did something. She brought her right hand up in the guard salute, the full formal salute, not the acknowledgement gesture, the complete thing, and she held it for a long moment. Velacruz returned it, exactly, because that is what you do when your commander salutes you. And then Sailveth moved on down the line, and the ceremony continued, and everything proceeded as it was supposed to. But I had seen it, and I had seen the Dravani speaker, standing just inside the reception hall entrance, close enough that the glass-pane doors hadn't fully closed, yet turn at the sound of the salute. He had seen it too. What it meant, I asked Yeva later. She was quiet for a moment, the way she got when she was deciding whether something was worth saying out loud. Sailveth has been in the guard for 31 years, she said finally. She has never, in the time I have been on this station, done an unspontaneous thing. Everything she does is deliberate and calculated, and communicates exactly what she intends it to communicate. So the salute was not routine, Yeva said. A commander walking an honor guard line before a ceremonial event is performing a brief inspection, not an exchange of formal salutes. What she did was out of protocol. A pause. Deliberately. She was sending a message, I said. She was clarifying something, Yeva said, and she corrected me carefully, the way a precise person corrects an imprecise person. There's a difference. A message is something you send when you're uncertain whether the recipient understands. A clarification is what you do when someone has been operating under a misapprehension. I thought about that. The Dravani thought they were laughing at something small, I said. At something negligible, Yeva agreed. A small creature out of place among the real soldiers, something that didn't quite fit. And Sailveth was clarifying. She was establishing, Yeva said, what the guard's own assessment of that soldier's standing was, in front of a compact diplomatic delegation that included the individual who had publicly expressed contempt for that soldier, in a formal ceremonial context that carries weight by design. She picked up her coffee. It's a very efficient communication. The broader thing, I've been trying in telling this not to make it bigger than it was, because I wasn't there for something historic. No one was. It was a guard rotation on a transit station during an otherwise unremarkable week. No weapons discharged, no formal incident, no speeches, no news items. But I keep thinking about what it was about at its core. The Dravani laughter on the long walk was about a specific thing, the belief that appearance is standing, that a being who doesn't look like power can be safely dismissed, that the uniform means less if the body inside it doesn't fit your idea of what authority should look like. That's something smaller, differently shaped, newer to the stage, something like a human, standing among species who have been in space since before your great-great-great-grandparents were born, that such a thing is inherently less serious. Inherently less real. Velacruz didn't answer that with words. He didn't make a scene, he didn't file a complaint, he didn't ask anyone for help, and he didn't perform indignation. He did something both simpler and harder. He kept being exactly what he was. He did his job with exactly the precision his job required. Not more, not less. And in doing so, he made something visible that the laughter had tried to obscure, that his presence in that formation was not accidental, was not decorative, was not a political gesture by the compact toward its newest member species. It was professional. It was earned. And the people who worked closest to him, who had watched him do his job for months, in conditions that included being laughed at, those people knew it. When Orathvel looked at him on the long walk, I think now he was seeing something he already knew confirmed. A soldier responding to mockery the way a professional responds to mockery, by continuing to be professional. When Sailveth saluted him in the reception hall, she was communicating the guard's internal assessment of its own, not for Velocruz's benefit, not really, though maybe partly, but for the benefit of everyone watching. This is how we see this person. Our read and your read are not the same. The conversation I had at the end. On my last day of the extension, I ran into Velocruz on the long walk. He was in uniform, off-duty posture, not on a formal route, just moving between areas, the kind of transit everyone does constantly on a station this size. He saw me and nodded. We walked together for a bit, not talking at first. "Heard you're leaving tomorrow," he said. "Cargo manifests wait for no one," I said. A small sound that was almost a laugh. We walked some more. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You've been asking me things for 3 weeks." "Fair," I said, "but this is a different kind of thing." He glanced at me sideways. "Do you ever get used to it?" I asked. "The way people look at you? The Dravani thing, but also just generally. The being new, the being human in a space where that means something different than it means on Earth." He thought about it for a while, long enough that we passed 2 of the observation benches and reached the halfway point of the long walk before he answered. "I don't think you get used to it," he said. "I think you get through it, which is different." "How?" "Getting used to something implies it stops bothering you, and I'm not sure it should stop bothering you completely." He paused. "If it stopped bothering me, I might stop paying attention, and paying attention is part of the job." "But it doesn't," I tried to find the word. "It doesn't break you." He was quiet for a moment. "The day I stepped onto my first guard posting," he said, "I was 25 years old and there were 30 Velori soldiers in the unit and I was the only human. And the first week I did option 1, tried to make myself invisible. Did it work?" "Option 1 never works," I said. "You told me." "Right, so the second week I tried to be louder, pushed back at everything that rubbed me wrong." "Did that work?" "Option 2 never works either." "Also right?" A pause. "So by week 3 I had options exhausted and I just started doing my job. Exactly my job, not performing toughness, not performing belonging. Just doing the work the way I'd been trained to do it every day until the day ended and then I did it again." And he said, "About 4 months in, my unit sergeant, at the time it was a Velori woman named Saravel, 14 years of service, had absolutely no patience for anything she considered theatrics. She put me on the Advanced Navigation Qualification course, which is not something you get put on in your first year. It's something you get put on when your direct command thinks you're worth developing." "She saw what you were doing," I said. "She saw what I was doing," he agreed. "And she made a decision about it. And that decision changed what the rest of my unit thought about me because those things travel. When someone who is rigorous about quality chooses you, people pay attention to that." We had reached the far end of the long walk, the junction where it split toward the diplomatic arm and the civilian transit zones. "You're going to be doing this for a long time," I said. "Yeah. Does that feel like a lot?" He stopped at the junction, looked down the corridor toward the diplomatic arm, where you could see, at the far end, the light changing color near the airlocks. That particular blue shift the station used to indicate a pressurized docking connection. "It feels like a job," he said. "That's not nothing." He looked at me. "You want the real answer?" he said. "Yes." "Every species in the compact has a story," he said. "About when they arrived, about when they were new, about when they were the ones who didn't quite fit yet. The Velori forget theirs sometimes because it was so long ago. The Dravani forget theirs because they've constructed an identity around not having been new. But all of them, every single species in the compact, was once where we are now, was once the thing that didn't quite belong, and they all built something. They all figured it out. He paused. We'll figure it out too. We're doing it right now. Every day, every posting, every corridor, every stupid incident on a long walk. Every moment someone decides to keep being what they are, I said. He nodded, and then he went left, toward the diplomatic arm, and I went right, toward the civilian transit zone, and that was the last time I saw him on Verath Station. What I took home, I went back to Earth for about 3 weeks after Verath. Restocked, filed my reports, visited my family, had actual oatmeal in my parents' kitchen with the particular quality of light that comes through a window in the morning and has nothing ultraviolet in it and doesn't give you a headache. And the whole time I was there, I kept thinking about the long walk. Not about the laughter specifically. Not about the salute, though that stayed with me, but about Velocruz's answer to my last question. We're doing it right now, every day, every posting, every corridor. I've been thinking about the compact, about humanity's place in it in terms of moments. Big moments. First contact moments, diplomatic breakthroughs, heroic events. The kind of things that end up in news digests and school curricula. The version of history that is a series of pivots, dramatic turns, before and afters. But what Velocruz was describing was different. He was describing something made not of moments, but of accumulation. The daily weight of continuing to be yourself, clearly and without apology, in spaces where someone is always deciding whether you belong there. The decision, made again and again with no fanfare, on a transit corridor, at a duty station, in a cafeteria break area, to be exactly what you are. That is not a moment, that is a practice. And it is, if I'm being honest about what I saw on Verath Station, the most distinctly human thing I've ever witnessed. Not the laughter, that wasn't human. The laughter was Dravani. Not the formal salute, that was guard protocol, as deliberate and calibrated as Yeva described. The thing that was human was the 20 minutes in between. The walk back down the long walk. The decision about what to do with mockery that couldn't be answered with words or force. The resolution to simply continue. To occupy the space you've been given with the full weight of who you are. The universe is very old, and it is very large, and there are species in it who have been doing this for longer than we have recorded our own history. They have accumulated power and territory and wisdom and contempt for the species that haven't had as long. And we are new, but we keep showing up, and we keep doing the work. And some mornings, in corridors lit with ultraviolet amber light, amid the clicking of Keth traders and the rumble of Dravani laughter and the measured tread of a Velori sergeant major's footsteps, someone pays attention. Someone looks, and what they see is not what they expected. They laughed at him because he was small in a universe that respects size. They stopped laughing when they realized that size had nothing to do with it, that the thing standing in that formation, keeping perfect step with soldiers who'd been born into the stars, was not small at all. It was simply something they hadn't learned to see yet. And that is not a problem with the thing. That is a problem with the seeing.